Long before Wall Street existed, before capitalism and central banks, a single scholar whispered a warning into the future. He said that when money drifts away from morality, when wealth rises faster than wisdom, civilizations begin to rot from the inside out. His warning was ignored, then and now. So what happens? When a society becomes richer than it becomes wise, in the year 1100, the world looked very different, and yet disturbingly familiar. Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo. Cities glowing with wealth, intellect, and restless ambition. Markets thundered with merchants, caravans, spices, silk, silver. Fortunes shifting hands faster than anyone could understand. It was the height of the Islamic Golden Age, a civilization bursting with innovation, art, science, and staggering prosperity. But beneath the glittering surface, another reality was taking shape. Wealth was rising, but so was inequality. Commerce was booming, but so was moral tension. Ideas flourished, but so did uncertainty about the soul of society itself. Ghazali was born into a world racing forward, a world gaining money faster than meaning, a world that looked in many ways exactly like ours. Al-Ghazali was not born into power, he fought his way into it. From the crowded streets of Persia to the highest halls of scholarship, he rose like a storm. Jurist, philosopher, theologian. A mind so sharp it reshaped every field it touched. By his mid-30s, he held the most prestigious academic seat in the Islamic world, the place where empires sent their brightest to learn how society should function. But Ghazali was different. He wasn't intoxicated by prestige or wealth or the loud confidence of a booming civilization. He was disturbed by it. He looked out at a world celebrating prosperity and quietly asked the question no one else dared to. What happens when a civilization becomes brilliant on the outside, but hollow on the inside? What makes societies rise, and what makes them collapse? To Ghazali, economics wasn't just math or markets. It was psychology. It was morality. It was spiritual behavior disguised as financial behavior. And he believed that the way people used money revealed the true condition of their souls. Ghazali broke the intellectual rules of his time with one radical idea. Money has morality, not metaphorically, literally. He believed money was not just a tool of trade, but a mirror that revealed the inner state of a civilization. Its value didn't come from the gold, the silver, or the symbols stamped on its surface. Its value came from what it reflected about the people who used it. And in that mirror, he saw a dangerous truth. Hoarded money, he said, is dead money. Wealth locked away in vaults, chests, palaces, or private accounts doesn't nourish anyone. It doesn't build. It doesn't circulate. It freezes the bloodstream of society, turning a thriving economy into a cold, stagnant body. To Ghazali, hoarding wasn't just selfish. It was a slow, quiet form of social suffocation. And then there was speculation, not the strategic brilliance modern traders celebrate, but moral corruption wearing the mask of intelligence. He saw speculation as profit extracted without contribution, wealth created by exploiting fear, scarcity, and crisis, rather than by offering anything of value. A society that rewards this, he warned, begins to rot from the inside. Every coin, every transaction, every price was to him an ethical act. Because when people profit without building, when they take without giving, when they deceive rather than serve, trust collapses. And once trust collapses, no market, no empire, no economy can stand. And if you look closely, his warnings echo our world today. Billionaires hoarding more wealth than some nations. Crisis profiteering turning human suffering into financial opportunity. Speculative bubbles inflating and bursting with mechanical regularity. Markets manipulated not by need or innovation, but by algorithms and greed. Ghazali saw all of this coming, not because he predicted the future, but because he understood the oldest truth in human history. Money does not corrupt society, it reveals the corruption already inside it. Ghazali believed that every economic system, no matter how wealthy or advanced, rests on something far more fragile than gold or law. It rests on trust, the invisible architecture holding the entire civilization together. Not the trust written in contracts, but the trust woven into everyday behavior. The trust that a coin is honest, that a merchant is fair, that a ruler protects rather than prays. and he warned that once this trust begins to crack, collapse is already in motion. Cheating, he said, spreads like a virus. One merchant uses false weights, another follows to stay competitive, a third justifies it because everyone else is doing it. Soon the entire market becomes a theater of deception, and the ordinary person, the buyer, the worker, the farmer, no longer knows who to believe. He saw the same pattern in craftsmanship. Fake quality, concealed defects, manipulated prices, shortcuts masked as skill. Once this becomes normal, the value of labor disappears and the dignity of work dissolves. People stop trying to create excellence and start trying to survive dishonesty. But the most dangerous corruption, Ghazali warned, starts at the top. When a ruler manipulates currency, distorts taxes, or bends the rules for personal gain, the damage radiates outward like poison in the bloodstream. Corrupt rulers create corrupt merchants create corrupt communities, and corrupt communities create a corrupt society, one that looks strong on the outside but rots quietly from within. Ghazali's verdict was ruthless in its clarity. A civilization can survive drought, it can survive poverty, it can survive war, but it cannot survive corruption. Because corruption does not just break laws, it breaks the trust that makes people believe in the value of anything at all. Once trust dies, money becomes paper, institutions become theater, promises become noise. And no empire, no matter how wealthy, can survive when its citizens no longer believe in the moral foundation beneath their own society. In Ghazali's eyes, collapse was never primarily economic. Collapse was psychological. Collapse was spiritual. Collapse was what happens when people stop trusting each other and start acting as if the whole game is rigged. Ghazali's most dangerous idea, the one that made rulers uncomfortable, was brutally simple. A state can destroy its own money. Not through war, not through invasion, not through famine, but through its own decisions. Through policies disguised as clever solutions, quick fixes, or temporary measures. Through actions that erode the trust that gives money its power in the first place. He condemned one practice above all: debasement. When rulers diluted gold or silver coins, shaving a little metal off here, mixing in cheaper alloys there, Ghazali called it what it truly was: theft in slow motion. A ruler who weakens the currency, he said, is reaching into every citizen's pocket without their permission. It is not an economic tactic. It is a moral betrayal. And inflation? To Ghazali, inflation was not just numbers rising. It was the erosion of dignity. It was the silent punishment of the poor, who receive weaker coins, weaker wages, weaker futures, while the elite protect themselves through land, assets, or power. Inflation was not an abstract force. It was a crime committed through policy. He warned that when rulers manipulate currency too often, a strange thing happens. The people quietly abandon the money of their own homeland. They turn to foreign coins, stronger, more stable, more trustworthy. And when a society stops believing in its own currency, the collapse has already begun. 900 years later, Ghazali's warnings read like a prophecy fulfilled. We saw it in Weimar Germany, where money burned faster than it could be printed, where people needed wheelbarrows of cash to buy bread, and eventually fled to foreign currencies just to survive. We saw it in Zimbabwe, where a $100 trillion note became a symbol of national humiliation, a currency so broken that people turned to US dollars and South African rand instead. We saw it in Venezuela, where inflation devoured savings, salaries, and entire lifetimes, where families abandoned the bolivar for dollars, euros, and even cryptocurrencies. We see it in Argentina, where the peso crumbles under constant manipulation and where people instinctively look abroad for something, anything, more trustworthy. The pattern repeats with eerie precision. Every collapsed currency in modern history has followed the script Ghazali wrote a millennium ago. Not because he had supernatural foresight, but because he understood a universal truth about human behavior and power. When the state breaks its promise, the money breaks with it. And once money breaks, society follows. Ghazali wasn't predicting the future. He was describing the mechanism of collapse itself, a mechanism the modern world keeps rediscovering the hard way. Ghazali didn't stop at markets, rulers, or coins. He plunged into something far more dangerous: the human mind. because he understood that economies don't rise or fall because of numbers, they rise or fall because of people. He saw that money does not move on its own. It moves through fear, through desire, through insecurity and ambition. And unless you understand those forces, you will never understand why civilizations collapse. People hoard, he said, not because they are evil, but because they are afraid. Afraid of scarcity, of uncertainty, of losing control. Fear makes people freeze their wealth, pile it up, hide it away, and every coin removed from circulation becomes one more vein of society clogged and starved. People speculate not because they are brilliant, but because greed whispers that wealth should come fast, effortless, detached from meaningful contribution. Speculation becomes the fantasy of gain without labor, reward without creation. And when greed becomes a norm, bubbles grow like illusions made of thin glass, beautiful, enticing, and destined to shatter. People cheat when the system teaches them that honesty is punished and deception is rewarded. When shortcuts make more money than craftsmanship. When manipulation earns more praise than integrity. When corruption is not an exception but a strategy. And once cheating becomes smarter than honesty, the very concept of fairness begins to disintegrate. And people destroy trust when they feel trust no longer matters. When they look around and see institutions bending rules, leaders bending truth, markets bending morality, they do exactly what humans always do. They adapt. They imitate the system they live inside. If the world rewards corruption, corruption becomes normal. If the world rewards fear, fear becomes strategy. If the world rewards greed, greed becomes survival. Ghazali saw this with terrifying clarity. He understood that the economy is not separate from the soul of a civilization. It is the soul, expressed through trade, work, and exchange. You cannot fix markets without fixing people's incentives. You cannot repair money without repairing meaning. You cannot stabilize a currency if the society behind it is psychologically unstable. His thesis was simple and devastating. You cannot fix an economy without fixing the human behavior that drives it. You can change laws, change interest rates, change rulers, change currencies. But unless you change the emotional forces beneath it all, fear, greed, ego, insecurity, the collapse will repeat. Because the true engine of any civilization is not its wealth, but the psychology of the people who hold it. Ghazali never demonized wealth. In fact, he saw it as one of the great gifts of civilization, a force that could build cities, fund scholarship, feed families, elevate entire nations. Wealth was not the enemy, but wealth without responsibility. That, he said, was the beginning of decay. He drew a sharp line between two kinds of wealth, two completely different moral universes. The first was wealth earned through effort, the farmer who tills the land, the craftsman who shapes raw material into beauty, the merchant who trades with honesty, the thinker who shares knowledge that uplifts society. This kind of wealth builds character. It strengthens families, stabilizes markets, enriches communities. It ties the individual to the collective good and teaches discipline, patience, and purpose. It is wealth that gives as it grows. The second kind was wealth extracted through manipulation, the profit made by deception rather than skill, the gain earned through exploiting scarcity, the fortune built on loopholes, evasion, or fear. This wealth does not build character, it rots it. It detaches the wealthy from the people who feed, build, or support the system beneath them. It encourages shortcuts, arrogance, detachment, and an illusion of invincibility. It treats society like a resource to be mined, rather than a community to be uplifted. Ghazali believed that a civilization survives only when the first kind of wealth dominates, when the builders outweigh the extractors, when the people who contribute outnumber the people who simply take. Because once a society begins to reward extraction over contribution, once the parasites become more powerful than the producers, once manipulation becomes more profitable than effort, collapse becomes inevitable. Not always suddenly, not always loudly. Sometimes decay begins slowly, in the quiet resignation of the worker, in the cynicism of the youth, in the widening gap between those who create and those who consume the system. Ghazali warned that a nation can withstand hunger, drought, even political turmoil, but it cannot withstand a moral inversion, a world where the wrong people are rewarded for the wrong reasons. In such a world, wealth becomes detached from responsibility, and responsibility becomes detached from power. The wealthy withdraw into fortresses of abundance, the poor sink into frustration, and the middle collapses under the weight of a system that no longer recognizes fairness. A society does not collapse when it runs out of money. A society collapses when it runs out of meaning. When the connection between wealth and responsibility snaps. When contribution is replaced by extraction. When taking becomes more profitable than giving. And when those who hold the most feel the least obligation to those who have the least. That, Ghazali believed, is the turning point where prosperity begins to poison itself. Ghazali wrote his warnings nearly 1,000 years ago, yet today they read less like ancient philosophy and more like breaking news. Look around our world and the parallels are almost uncomfortable. We live in an age where inequality has reached heights not seen in centuries. A handful of individuals controlling more wealth than entire nations, while millions struggle just to stay one step ahead of rising costs. The bloodstream of society is clogged again, not with buried coins, but with wealth locked in financial fortresses, offshore accounts, and assets never allowed to circulate. Our markets reward speculation over contribution. People make fortunes not by building anything real, but by predicting price movements, inflating bubbles, or exploiting algorithmic loopholes in systems they barely understand. It is profit without creation, the very pattern Ghazali warned would hollow out the soul of an economy. We face a growing loss of institutional trust. Governments change rules overnight. Corporations hide information behind layers of complexity. Banks collapse, then get rescued, then collapse again. People no longer know who to believe, and mistrust becomes the new default currency. Inflation rises and falls like a tide no one can predict, quietly eroding savings, wages, and security. The poor suffer first, as Ghazali foretold, and the middle soon follows. In a world where money buys less each year, confidence in the system dissolves one paycheck at a time. Debt has become a permanent reality, not a temporary condition, but a structural feature. Nations borrow endlessly. Consumers borrow to survive. Corporations borrow to inflate their own value. It is a cycle with no exit, a loop that pulls entire societies deeper into reliance on promises that may never be kept. And crises? Crises have become normal. Economic crashes, supply chain shocks, bank failures, housing bubbles, currency tremors. They no longer surprise us. They are expected, almost scheduled. A world living in constant financial anxiety is, in essence, a world already living inside the early stages of collapse. Everything Ghazali warned about, hoarded wealth, speculative frenzy, collapsing trust, manipulated currency, moral decay, has resurfaced with frightening clarity in our own time. It is not that his ideas were prophetic. It is that human behavior has not changed. The same incentives create the same outcomes, the same fears create the same patterns, and the same moral weaknesses produce the same unraveling. The modern world simply has faster technology, bigger numbers, and more sophisticated illusions, but the underlying psychology is identical. In the mirror of today's global economy, we are not seeing something new, we are seeing something ancient, repeating itself. Ghazali's final warning was the one history remembers least and needs most. Civilizations do not fall because they run out of food. They do not collapse because armies invade. They crumble from the inside. From the quiet, invisible rot that begins when a society forgets the moral purpose of its own wealth. Because money is not mechanical. It is not merely a tool of trade or a number on a glowing screen. Money is moral. It carries the weight of trust, the spirit of fairness, the invisible agreement that binds strangers together in cooperation rather than conflict. And when that moral framework is violated, when rulers manipulate currency, when elites hoard without giving back, when markets reward deceit over contribution, the system begins to break. Not economically at first, but spiritually. Soon, institutions lose legitimacy, people lose faith, contracts feel hollow, laws feel selective, and money, the very symbol of collective belief, becomes fragile. Ghazali captured it in one devastating line: where justice is lost, prosperity cannot remain. Not because prosperity disappears instantly, but because it slowly detaches from righteousness, becoming a glittering surface hiding a decaying core. Civilizations always imagine their collapse will come suddenly, from lightning strikes or foreign armies. But history shows the same truth again and again. A society falls the moment it forgets that wealth without morality is destruction wearing a crown. The world today is repeating a 1,000-year-old pattern. Rising wealth, rising fear, rising inequality. And beneath it all, a slow erosion of the trust that once held everything together. But understanding this pattern is the first step to escaping it. Because money is never just money. It is a mirror. A reflection of our choices, our values, our collective character. And if the reflection disturbs us, the change must begin within. In the way we earn, the way we trade, the way we treat responsibility as seriously as success. This is inner alchemy, the transformation that begins in the soul and radiates out into the world. If this gave you a new lens on our world, a perspective you've never been shown, subscribe for deeper hidden truths. You're not just learning history, you're learning the patterns that shape your future.